as the first speaker of the opposition team, my speech would start in 3, 2, 1. Education is the ultimate prowess into shaping your character, and while at it, finding a way or path to pursue. It is a fundamental material into who you are, what you are in a society, and how to make yourself a good part of it. And thus, we as a parent profoundly believes that we should prioritize formal education because first we would like for our children to be a good part of society. And formal education has the characteristics of being thoroughly planned and deliberate, and it values intellectual, social skills, and etc. that are ultimately fundamental in every field, including the creative field. And we would be a good parent and guide to shape our children in terms of intellectual and communication skills with the existence of formal education. But before I continue my speech, I would like to rebut and challenge the government characters as well as arguments that they mention regarding first. They say that it is principally the right type of parenting, including a bizarre characterization in the sense of comparing prioritizing formal education and deprioritizing it. They say that it's the right type of principle because they allow children to find their own way and their own meaning of life instead of a forced one. We would like to rebut that it is entirely untrue, and it is a very, very shallow idea, because even if formal education are structured hierarchically, even if it is, it doesn't mean that it is forced. And for example, in schools, the students are still free to explore what they like, what to pursue, what their interests are, what path are they gonna take. Because, for example, formal education includes extracurriculars, competitions for students, and etc. And the principles of a good parent would have the and we would say that a good parent would have the characterization of wanting their child to collect a social, communication, and intellectual skills while pursuing what they want, and thus it is an entirely harmonious process of learning. They say about people who don't like monotonous job, but we would like to rebut that it is a very narrow-minded concept of jobs that utilizes formal education, because they mention jobs like lawyer, doctor, and worker that are constantly typing on before the desk. But there are loads of jobs that requires including in the creative fields, that requires the utilization of formal education, because it inherently shapes the character of the person. And thus and they say that if formal education shapes a very traditional view of success, but on the contrary, with formal education they can adapt and quickly adjust to different types of success of what they desire, because they're trained to think critically. And they said that it is they said that it keeps you struggling the ups and downs of self-learning. But without formal education, the struggle may be constant, and not everyone is constantly under fire to keep struggling. They could get tired, and when they get tired, they have the tendency to quit from the field that they were initially so passionate about, but they would not have a safety net in the form of a formal education. Thus they wouldn't know a thing. It is not and also learning from their mistakes are not exclusive, because it could also comes from formal education. And they said that self-education costs a fortune, but we would like to rebut that it is untrue, because in the creative world, all the things are inconsistent, and it is constantly fluctuating like trends. Thus, we wouldn't be able to create a consistent income either, because trends are constantly changing. And thus, we would like to say that it's like playing with a lottery machine, inconsistent and constantly fluctuating. And thus, we would like to move on to my argument, is that formal education provides children to think critically, and they would develop communication skills, intellectual skills, adaptive skills, and etc. And if they work in creative world when they grow up, they would need these skills and equipments, because it would cause a result of cooperativeness with others, and how to respond to audience, and etc. Thus they would create a good social field within their work, within their creativity field. They can and also they can divide the good or bad from the internet, and because they would work there, right? But before, the government robots that they can divide good or bad through parents, through self-learning, through the videos that they watch. It would be entirely untrue, because Why? Because it is inherently a part of process in society that have variations of people. Whereas if self-learning, they are in home, for example, they are limited to only a certain types of people, like their parents were always good to them, siblings that are familiar with them, and they would not meet a wide variations of people to communicate with and to adapt their skills with. And also in the internet, they tend to encounter adults, strangers, without knowing good and bad, and they would that would and the impact is that with those equipments, social skills, adaptive skills, communication skills, they can easily divide what's good or bad, and they would intellectually and make up their minds, because they are, even without the help of the parents, constantly 24/7, because they are honed with those skills of communication and intellectual and adaptive skills that they get from formal education, and they would continuously be a good part of society, only achieved through and it could only be achieved through formal education, because one, parents are not would not be supervising them 24/7 until they're grown. And comparatively, if they set aside and choose to ignore those, if they set aside these and choose to ignore formal education, they have the possibilities, big possibilities to be laid on the shifting or their mindset, or they could be influenced by bad things on the source that they're learning, because it's not deliberate, it's not planned, and they would not be aware of the skills achieved through formal education, what it could have been. If this argument falls in oppose, then the opposition team would be thinking that communication and intellectual skills as harshly unimportant. The actors that would be impacted is that the children would possibly have a bad behavior or the lack of communication skills, because they're constantly learning through a computer. Thus, it would cause the parents to be impacted because of that bad parenting. So whether about the parent being a middle class or not, formal education would be obligated for the children and their parents to be good parents, and for their children, because it is one of the first steps of learning. And moving on to my second argument is that creativity in the world constantly fluctuates and changes, and that there are trends. There are like trends. For example, a children is so passionate in what they do and what they understand, but once the trend or the creativity a nuance has changed, what they do would not longer be relevant. For example, YouTubers or content creators who are slowly disappearing because they are irrelevant, because they could not keep up with the fluctuation of today's trend. And if there are no formal education, they would not have a backup for what they do after that content of that period of working in a creativity field. And the positive case is that formal education teaches you variety of skills, and thus it would be a safety net for them. It would be a backup for them in case they does not necessarily succeed in the creative world. And we are so proud to oppose.